Another news article about Newcastle stadium plans. How much longer they're going to talk about it? When are they actually going to do something? How's it, everybody? Welcome back to me, the Fontaine. Yes, some more news about Newcastle stadium plans. So the article is written by Luke Edwards. He's a northern football writer. He covers Newcastle and most of the clubs up north. It starts with saying Newcastle are looking at a major regeneration project as part of a plan to build a new stadium next to St James's Park. This shouldn't be breaking news to anybody. Newcastle's owners were never just going to randomly build a new stadium and not redevelop any of the areas around the stadium. Let's see what the rest of the news article said. Telegraph Sport understands the club is getting closer to deciding whether to rebuild their current home or move to a new stadium with a capacity that could rise as high as 68,000 on parts of Leazes Park. After months of planning and assessment, the club could make a final decision before the end of the year as they explore different ways to finance an ambitious infrastructure project that would modernize the city centre. Sources have described the regeneration as bold and exciting. This is slightly new information. We haven't heard much about Newcastle redeveloping the city centre. The most unique thing about St James's Park is that it is situated right in the heart of the city. The cathedral on the hill, an absolute beautiful piece of architecture right in the heart of the city of Newcastle. So you would think it's common sense that if you are going to redevelop a stadium like St James's Park, or if you're going to build a new stadium right next to St James's Park in Leazes Park, which is the park right behind Newcastle, that it makes sense to completely modernize the city centre as well. We're going to get onto things like infrastructure in a second, but there's so many shoulds and coulds and woulds. To be honest with you, I am getting really frustrated by this. I appreciate it takes a huge amount of planning permission and engagement with the council. They're also looking for government funding as well, which we'll get onto in a second. But where there's a will, there's a way. Money talks at the end of the day, and Newcastle's owners have the deepest pockets in world football. So you would think financing is not going to be a massive issue. It is understood the club has held conversations with the government about securing public money to help finance the regeneration of the surrounding area, although it has been made clear that money will not be used to construct a new stadium. Now, this is slightly different to the Man United concept or construction plan. A couple of months ago, they unveiled a plan for a huge 100,000 seater stadium. It got labelled a circus tent because it looked like a circus tent. And Jim Radcliffe was aiming to use a lot of government funding, and government funding is basically you and me, the taxpayers' money, to help regenerate and build the new stadium and the surrounding area. The difference here, which is slightly new news, is that the owners of Newcastle are potentially going to fully fund the build of the new stadium, but they're now looking for government money to help build up the surrounding area as well. Not fully, but just partially. It goes on to say the club will also contribute a large chunk of the financing needed for the wider city regeneration, although there is optimism that public money could be put forward to boost those plans. A case is being made that this would be a fantastic opportunity for a Labour government to modernise a city in its traditional heartland that has suffered from underinvestment compared to other major urban areas, you're telling me. Although the new stadium is the most important part of the plan for supporters, it would merely be part of a massive redevelopment that would draw a wave of private investment to the city. Now, although this is good news and it's great news, it's not reinventing the wheel. The Man City owners have done this beautifully since they took over the club. They've really redeveloped the Etihad and the surrounding areas. It's a completely different place. It's created so many jobs, so much investment, so much retail, so much accommodation, and importantly, the infrastructure around the place has been increased as well. The idea is not only to construct a new stadium, likely the third largest in England, behind Wembley and Old Trafford, but also to reconstruct the surrounding area with new retail, leisure and business buildings, as well as affordable housing and apartments. Now, anytime that you use the government's money to build housing, you always have to proportion a certain percentage to affordable housing. That's just a given. The city's transport infrastructure would also need to be overhauled and improved. Again, this is bog standard. If you're going to increase the capacity of the stadium from 52 to 60 or 70, whatever, we'll get onto capacity in a second, it makes complete sense that you'll need to overhaul the transport. It's not just a case of adding an extra carriage on a train. It's about making sure they can run more frequently. It's about making sure platforms can accommodate people more safely, huger numbers. If you have a concert, for example, at the new stadium, the capacity is not going to be that. It's going to be even more because you have people on the grass. Remember Live Aid, for example, at Wembley. But to get back to the article, it says Newcastle is majority owned by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, PIF, and it would finance a large part of the project. But money would also need to be raised from other investors and lenders. I want to draw your attention to the word investing. Investing is not charity, it's not philanthropy, it's investing. It means that you put money in and you expect something back in return. Now, what do the owners or what do PIF expect back in return? That remains to be seen. The cost of a new stadium, which Newcastle will cover entirely, will exceed £1 billion. But even more money would be needed to finance the wider regeneration of the city centre. Although a final design for a new stadium has not been drawn up, modelling has given the club an idea of what is achievable. Construction would take about 3 years once planning permission is obtained. That gives us a bit of a rough timeline. There's a couple of dominoes which need to fall before a spade gets put in the ground to start construction. Planning permission. Now, if you're going to be doing planning permission, you need to have a pretty solid plan that's either construction planning, that's going to be infrastructure planning, that you can submit to the council for them to scrutinize. And there needs to be a period of engagement where they need to inform the local community, they need to inform all the bodies that are affected, all the wildlife and the conservation societies, etc., would all need a consultation period where people have an opportunity to either object or say, yes, that's great, or say, oh, you forgot about this, whatever. Where you're going to put the ducks in the pond in Leazes Park, for example, how you're going to increase biodiversity, what are you going to do about noise pollution, light pollution, sound pollution, if you're doing concerts, for example, people living next door to a new stadium. All of these things need to be considered, and all of these things take time. But the very first thing you need is a plan. You need a plan which you can submit. That plan can obviously change or be amended or be scrutinized accordingly. But the first and foremost, you need a plan. It sounds like David Hopkinson has this very high on his agenda. It says in the article itself, modeling has given the club an idea of what's achievable. So obviously they have been using a pencil and a paper and they've been drawing up different concepts. They've definitely looked at increasing St James's Park. David Hopkinson himself said on a TalkSport interview a couple of months ago, you can look at my summary in the video over here, that he thinks that St James's Park can be increased by 12 to 15,000. Now, if you're going to be increasing St James's Park from 52 to 67 or 69,000, I don't see why you would build a brand new stadium at a capacity of 67,000 if you could just renovate St James's Park for 67,000 as well. I appreciate there's the huge caveat about corporate hospitality. Corporate hospitality is where you get wined and dined. It often includes a lot of people coming from outside the club, sometimes flying in for games or maybe coming from other parts of the country. You have a meal before the games. Sometimes you meet a club legend. Your seat might be slightly cushioned. You get a program and maybe a pin. You maybe get a pint at half time. But it is where the club can really generate better revenue. Lots of fans are not going to like it, but it is an absolute must in this day and age to have a big proportion, not the majority of course, but to have a big proportion of your ticketing allocated to corporate hospitality. You're talking in the tickets in the range of 500, 800, 1,000, 2,000 pounds in some instances. Obviously it makes a difference if you're playing Barcelona in the Champions League or Plymouth Argyle in the FA Cup. Going back to the program and the timeline very quickly, you have to obviously think about the construction phase. Now, I have first-hand experience in working with architects, and architects can draw wacky things. We've seen all the images from Saudi Arabia of stadiums at the top of a building or in a desert or built into the rocks, for example. Architects can go absolutely crazy because the pen doesn't have any handcuffs on them. They can draw whatever they want. It's a completely different thing actually building something. Taking things like the UK legislation into account in terms of what you can and can't do is a completely different matter. So even if you have these conceptual images from architects, a contractor still needs to go, well, you can't build that because from a structural point of view, it's not possible, for example. Always just take the initial plans with a slight pinch of salt. I've got first-hand experience in this. You never end up with what the initial plan is. On some occasions, you might end up with something better or safer or more efficient, but it will never be version 1 of what we actually see. Let's wrap up the news article. It says Newcastle are in talks to purchase the land where they plan to build a new £200 million state-of-the-art training ground in Woolsington, close to the city airport. This will bring the 2 major infrastructure projects promised when PIF took control of the club back in 2021 closer to completion. The building of a new stadium has dragged on for 2 years, but there is thought to be fresh impetus behind the project and a desire to go bigger and bolder in order to bring the maximum benefit to the city as a whole. The creation of new retail, business, leisure buildings is also expected to attract major national and international business to the city centre and potentially create thousands of new jobs, which is fantastic. That has not stopped opposition to the proposed building in Leazes Park, with the Save Newcastle Wildlife Campaign group collecting thousands of signatures in protest at the idea of building on the Victorian green space, which is part of a larger conservation area. Now I'm going to stop there very quickly. If you look at the footprint or square footage of which St James's Park takes up, if you go and plonk that in Leazes Park and you then increase the capacity, obviously that's going to encroach on the wildlife. So Newcastle 100% would have to break St James's Park down and build that as a green biodiversity space. You could also incorporate green spaces within the stadium. Again, I have first-hand knowledge on this in terms of what this entails. If you start having plants up in the boxes and the suites, for example, that all counts towards biodiversity. Back to the news article, however, the group admits it does not actually know what it's opposing as the plans have not been made public. Multiple sources have pointed out that any major construction project is required to ensure there is a 10% biodiversity gain under UK law, as what I've just explained. A new green space would form a key part of the project, and only a fraction of Leazes Park would be lost to the new stadium. And the news article wraps up by saying, when contacted by Telegraph Sport, Newcastle United insisted that they have not made a final decision on whether to build a new stadium or to rebuild their current home. A spokesman declined to comment on the details of the wider regeneration proposal. So how do you take this news article? Are you really enthused by it? Are you excited that things sound as if they're slightly moving forward? Is this kind of death by 1,000 news articles where we're getting incremental information? First, the owners were saying that they weren't going to finance the whole stadium a couple of months ago because they were looking for additional funding. Now it looks as if they're going to go to the government and say, well, look, we're going to build tons of retail and shops and restaurants and hotels, which is going to create so many jobs for the local community in and around to Newcastle. It's also massively fundamentally important that they improve the infrastructure of the club. That's also needed for safety, as I said before. You can't have 65,000 people all leaving the stadium. Football has learned lessons and incorporated safety procedures. Tragically, due to the Hillborough disaster many years ago, it is an absolute standard that they would have to improve the safety and the transport facilities to ensure people can get out of the space and come to the space on time. Are you really excited? Are you in the camp where we think we should just bite the bullet and redevelop St James's Park? The only real opportunity at St James's Park is to redevelop the Gallagate end where we can get additional 15,000. I do think it's flogging a bit of a dead horse. I get it, St James's Park is unbelievable. There's huge memories there. It's an icon of the city. But I do think this is a pivotal moment in the club's history where we are so constrained by PSR or squad cost ratio, which is coming in. The rules of the game have changed. We need to box smart, need to make sure we absolutely maximize the potential club's revenue. A huge proportion of that is increasing the facility of the stadium, having much more corporate hospitality, opening up the stadium for NFL games, Super League, boxing, concerts, you name it. We need it all happening around the stadium area. We need to increase biodiversity. We need to increase the retail, the transport infrastructure, the works. This is not just about St. James's Park. I appreciate that's why it's taking a huge amount of time with planning permission and consultation. But as I said in the beginning of the video, where there's a will, there's a way, and money talks. I did want to give my 2 cents worth on the first leg away at Karabag, the whole penalty gate, Trippier, Gordon, Voltemade, etc. I feel very, very strongly that Anthony Gordon should have given the 4th penalty to Voltemade. At the end of the day, the comments are saying that, what about Shearer? Anthony Gordon is not Alan Shearer. He's not close to being in the same stratosphere as Alan Shearer. So the argument about he's a striker, he's the club's penalty taker, fine, I get it. But you are allowed to change who your penalty taker is. Voltemade is in desperate need for goals. We know we're playing slightly deeper in the 10 position. We know he's enjoying being on the ball more and feeding players around him. I've said before in my previous videos, he's got no pace, he's got no strength. Eddie's trying to find a place for him in the team where we can use his attributes for the team. We're not doing that for Voltemade, we're doing it for the team. I think Trippier's approach where he was trying to give Voltemade a penalty is completely rational. He's the captain of the team. He asked for it to be done. Gordon said no. I think that is absolutely poor form, not thinking about the team, thinking about himself. But we'll be very interested to hear your thoughts on that as well. That's it for this video. If you like what you hear, please do give us a like and subscribe, and don't forget,